Okay, okay.
Hello, Doc. Can you hear me?
Yes, Femi. Welcome,
Okay,
Femi.
thank you.
Yes. Um, okay. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the Syntax webinar. Everyone, this is our webinar, our first webinar series, and it's titled "Working from Home." Mitigating the risks of data privacy and security breaches. At the beginning of the year, we all had very high hopes and expectations, right? And those hopes and expectations are still very much alive, and all of that was driven and fueled by the fact that it's a new decade, it's the start of a new decade. It's also an Olympic year. It's supposed to be the Tokyo 2020 Olympic. In fact, the IMF had projected that the global economy will grow at about 3.3%. So a whole lot of optimism has been built into the year. The growth rate for 2019 was 2.9%, and so 2020 more or less came in as a year of lots of expectations and lots of hope. For the world, did not realize that we're heading for a global pandemic, which is just about a century after the Spanish flu, the famous Spanish flu, that had so much damage on the global economy, on mortality rate, human mortality rate. And now we have the COVID-19 pandemic. WHO has dubbed it as the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And it's snowballed from being, largely a health crisis to being an economic crisis now. And it has forced the world population, more than half of the world's population to go into lockdown. As a result, most businesses have made recourse to remote work, and having to work from home. And we now have the very famous WFH, which all started like a joke, and originally working from home used to be wasn't mainstream, but the COVID-19 pandemic has forced it to become mainstream. And now we see organizations relying on all sorts of conference calls, application, Microsoft Teams like we're using, Zoom, Skype, and name it, to enable them work efficiently from home. And it all started with a whole lot of excitement. It was a mixed basket. But lots of people were happy that they could spend time with their family, and less time commuting to work, and all of the hassles. Unfortunately, it has dragged on, and most of those excitement has waned. But more importantly, one emerging concern and threat has been that of encroachment on privacy, increased and heightened privacy and security risk. We see situations where personal data of people are being collected without authorization, without consent, without their permission. You have situations where even the applications we are relying on to collect data like your location data, your operating system, details, your IP address, or even at times there are features that are activated that can measure your attention, so it will assess whether or not you are paying attention, you are using your keyboard, or you are surfing other things on the net. And all of those data is processed, largely. We've seen situations where, meetings that are supposed to be private, becomes the subject of video bombing, or you have people who get and gain unauthorized access to those meetings, or even situations where you have other applications working side by side, with your own primary application, but they will be eavesdropping on your conversation, on your documents, and all of that. We also have situations where, malicious softwares and malicious websites have access to our computers because we are relying on certain applications to help us work from home. And they can turn on your camera, and record you without your knowledge. You have situations of even very intrusive tracking, and even compromise of files and documents and data. So we'll be discussing all of the issues around working from home today, in the course of our webinar today. And joining me to discuss most of these issues are my colleagues. We have Landry Bankole. Landry will be joining me. My colleague Michael Ango will also be joining us in the next few minutes. And Landry is a manager with Anderson Tax. He's our IT specialist. He'll be speaking through, he'll be speaking to the IT issues. Also joining me is Femi Daniel from NITSDA. Femi, is the head of the data protection desk, and is the team lead for regulatory and compliance on privacy issues. So he will be speaking to all of the privacy issues from the regulatory angle, and also, he'll be sharing his perspective on a whole lot of issues. So we have representation from both sides of the aisle, from the private sector and from the public sector, and Mike Ango, too, who heads our privacy practice, will also be, sharing his thoughts on all of these issues. And once he joins, I'll just put him on. So we have Mike. Mike has joined us. So Mike will be sharing his perspective on these issues with us. So I'll give the floor to Mike, because Mike will be doing a presentation, a short presentation, and that would just take about 15 minutes. He'll be running us through, introducing us to data protection generally. So those people who are on this webinar who have not heard about privacy data protection can get some insight into what it means before, our experts delve into the technical details and the technical bits of the presentation. So I'll be leaving the floor for Mike, so Mike can take over the floor. So Mike.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. You're all welcome to this webinar. It's the first in our series. So before I start, let me introduce myself again. My name is Michael Ango. I'm an associate director at Anderson Tax. I head the data protection service at Anderson Tax. So Sam has given you guys an overview. He's mentioned experts. I'd like to say that, we are all learning, as it were, of course, at different levels of knowledge. Maybe Femi from NITSDA is more of an expert than us, but we're all putting in our bits. So what we'd like to do first before
disagree.
You're having modest, Femi. So what we'll start first, it's important that you lay a foundation for anything you're going to do. And I think data protection as, an area of practice in Nigeria as a legal regime is new. We had our first formal, data protection regime passed in January 2019. It's the Nigerian Data Protection Regulations. And I think that's the foundation of data protection and privacy as we have it in Nigeria today. So what this presentation essentially is going to do is just give you an overview of what the
Okay, I think we've lost Mike, so I'll just I'll take over the presentation until Mike rejoins us.
Am I back?
Okay, welcome back, Mike.
All right, sorry. These are the kind of things we deal with. We're still using, Femi, you guys need to work on broadband so that we have very good broadband in Nigeria. Okay, Mike, so like I said, we're going to talk about data protection in the light of the NDPR, what it entails. And I like to always start by saying, what is data? Data has many definitions, but data essentially is any information, that is important or useful in terms of running your own business. We have different types of data. We have corporate data, we have financial data, and then we have personal data. Personal data is the subject of our discourse today. Personal data essentially relates to data that is personal to you. In that sense, your name, your phone numbers, your email addresses, your house address, your phone number and all of that. So anything that is unique to you, it's your own data. It's specific to you, it's personal data. And as we know, for those of us who are in this area of practice, we know that data is really the new gold in the real sense of it. Today, because of COVID-19, companies, oil companies are having, downturn and all of that. But the data companies are doing well. The Amazons, the Microsofts, the Facebooks and all. So really data is where it is right now. If you look at the most valuable companies globally, they are companies that deal with data. Whether you're talking of Alibaba, Google, Microsoft. I know someone who sold, a Nigerian who sold his shares in Facebook about 3 years ago for $2 million. And I'm very serious about that. So data is very valuable. Let's move on. So if data is valuable, if things like your mobile phones, your laptops, your vehicles, your office equipment are valuable, you will safeguard them, you will protect them. So in the same way, also data is valuable, you need to safeguard your data, you need to protect your data. And over time, we've had laws that protect data. As far back as 1948, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that introduced, the right to privacy as a fundamental right. For us in Nigeria here, it's enshrined in Section 37 of our Constitution that, says that you have a right to privacy of your homes, your communication, and all of that. And there's a general global trend, to ensure that there are regimes that are put in place to protect the privacy of individuals, secure them, and also, of course, promote the digital economy, which is really where data, that's where data, the space where data is very valuable. So I'd like to just talk briefly about the NDPR. NDPR, like I said, was issued by the Nigerian National Information Technology Development Agency in January 2019. It's really a regime and a framework that seeks to safeguard, regulate, and protect the privacy of individuals and how your your personal data is used, whether by your employers, by companies you give them to, service providers, and all of that. So it has a very detailed, compliance obligations, and it applies to all agencies in Nigeria, whether government or private. Just for clarity, the NDPR was issued pursuant to the powers of NITDA under Section 6 of NITDA Act that gives NITDA the powers to develop guidelines for electronic governance, monitor the use of electronic data in Nigeria, and also all forms of electronic transactions. So, next slide. So I'll just run you down through some of the objectives of the NDPR. One, like I said, is to safeguard your right to privacy, data privacy, to, of course, safeguard transactions which involve exchange of personal data. If you walk into a shop, you buy something, they collect your mobile phone, maybe they want to contact you if they have deals or promos, they must handle that data in a particular way. Banks transfer your personal data, you apply for a visa, The embassy wants to know if your bank statement is genuine and all of that. The way your bank transmits that information to the embassy. Your employer wants to do a background check on you, your certificates and all of that. So basically, is to safeguard transactions involving exchange of personal data and also to prevent manipulation of personal data. So if I give you my personal data, how do you manage it? What if you go and change it? What if, like how we see hackers, they hack into your bank accounts and all of that. People hack into other people's mobile phones and use it to call somebody and say, this is Governor Sam calling from Kogi State government house, and all of that. So these are important things, but more importantly also is to ensure that Nigerian businesses are competitive in international trade. And the whole idea is that Nigeria is a member of the global community. We don't do things in isolation. We want to trade, we want to do business internationally. You and I want to travel and use our credit cards. Some of us want to travel and roam our mobile phone, our mobile numbers and all of that. So if we're doing those things, we have to ensure that we have regimes, local regimes that protect and safeguard data. How do people offshore transfer data to us? Do they feel secure if they're transferring data to us? Nigerian businesses also want to be part of the global outsourcing business, for example. We know that India is a major hub of outsourcing because they have in place, significant systems to ensure that when you send data to them, they protect it. Likewise, in Nigeria, want to be either for HR purposes and all of that. So if people transfer data to you, you want to be sure that you can safeguard that data. And then, of course, if your companies are trusted, then they will be competitive in international trade. The scope of the NDPR is very wide, whether it covers all transactions which are intended for processing or intended for processing or actual processing of personal data, whether this is done manually or automated. And more importantly, it applies to all Nigerians, i.e., Nigerians living in Nigeria and Nigerians living outside Nigeria, and also foreigners living in Nigeria. So now it has a number of principles. Some of these things are a bit technical, so I'll run through them. Like I said, this is just to give you an overview of what the data protection entails, and of course the NDPR. If you want to get more in-depth information, you may contact us after this webinar. But there's certain principles that guide the NDPR. So I'll run through them. Like I said, the first one is legitimate, lawful, and with consent, i.e. any processing of data. Processing, of course, is anything. Processing is collection, use, transfer, review, and all of that. So anything that has to do with personal data, any activity that you carry out with personal data is processing. So anything you do, it must be legitimate, it must be lawful, and it must be with the consent of the individual. So if it could be legitimate, it could be lawful, but if you don't have my consent, you can't, of course, deal with my data. Then, there's the issue of storage and security. So what that entails is that you only store personal data for a reasonable period for which you think you need it. If I come into your shop or if I've worked in your office and you have my employee information and all of that, and I've resigned or I've retired, and you keep my personal data for 20, 30 years after I've retired, it might not be reasonable for that purpose. And also importantly, you must secure any personal data you have in your custody. If you collect any data, you are responsible for it, so you must secure it. So that's the idea of concept of storage and security. Then we have data minimization. Data minimization simply means collect what is needed. Do not collect what you don't need. Somebody comes to you, maybe, an airline, for example, you want to fly. They have your phone number. Of course, they have your passport details and maybe your house address. Next thing they say, look, they want your mother's maiden name. They want your grandmother's first date of employment and all of that. That information is unnecessary. Okay, so data minimization simply means collect what is necessary for the purpose for which you want to use it. Duty of care, very clear. You owe me a duty of care. You collect my personal data. You owe me a duty of care. So the person who collects your data is known as your data controller, and you are known as the data subject. So there's a duty of care owed to the data subject by the data controller. Then specific purpose means if you collect data for a specific purpose, if you collect data because I'm working in your office today, you must only use it for the purpose of my employment. You cannot now, let's assume you collect my data because I'm working, in Anderson Tax, and then I leave Anderson Tax tomorrow, and Anderson Tax wants to sell property. Maybe Anderson Tax has delved into property business. You then start sending me promos or adverts to buy property. That is not the purpose for which my data was collected. So specific purpose means The purpose for which you collect data is the only purpose for which you can use it. If you want to use it for another purpose, you must inform, the data subject. Then also the idea of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. All these are concepts that you must handle it with confidentiality. You must ensure the integrity of the data you have, and then you must make the data available, of course, to the data subject when he or she needs it. Lastly, we have the issue of accountability and accuracy. Like I mentioned, any person entrusted with personal data is accountable for any actions relating to how that data is utilized. So what are these big compliance requirements under the NDPR? There are a number of them, and I'll just run through them again. The first one is that, well, we'll put that first, but it's not really the first one, but you need to appoint a data protection compliance organization. Data protection officer. So a DPO is really someone in your organization that has responsibility for data privacy issues. Okay. Then there's also the issue of publishing your data protection policy. These deadlines that you see on the screen, they are deadlines that have passed, but they were provided in the NDPR. So you should have published your data protection policy by 25th of April 2019. Of course, even if you haven't done that now, it is an obligation that you still need to satisfy. So let's move on. Then we also have, conduct of a mandatory self-audit. Initially, when the NDPR came out, the deadline for doing a mandatory self-audit simply means you are reviewing your data practices, you are reviewing your policies and your documents and saying, look, this is the level, or this is the level of compliance that I have at that date. So you are supposed to have done that by July 25th, 2019. It was moved to October 25th, and NITDA has now graciously given all companies, but with a caveat, only those companies who have appointed data protection compliance organizations that have written to NITDA to ask for an extension. It's giving them an extended deadline to May 15th, which is about 2 weeks from today, to ensure that they do a mandatory self-audit and file. Of course, there's also the annual audit and filing. That should happen every 15th of March. I think what has happened again, but Femi may talk better about that, is that for 2020, NITDA has said any companies that have done a mandatory self-audit are excused or have a waiver from filing their annual audits for 2020 until 2021. So those are the key requirements under the NDPR, but there are also more, granular requirements. And when we go into that, of course, if you want to find out, or like I said, you can consult us. But so all of these things include, of course, policies, documents you have to put in place. Starting from your data protection policy, you must have a data protection policy that states, this is what your organization, how you handle data, this is what you do with data. If you give us our data, this is how we'll handle it, and these are your rights. You have things like the privacy notices. The privacy notice essentially is a document that tells you about how a company handles your private your data that you've provided, and the ways in which you yourself can either modify or minimize the way they use your data. We have things like consent forms and all of that. If you collect data, did you get consent of the individual? Remember what I said, that all data processing must be done with consent. We have things like subject access requests. These are technical terms, but they really refer to a data subject giving you his or her information and then also asking you to provide that information back to him or her. There is a right of that. We have things like retention and erasure policy. What is your retention policy? Remember what we said about data minimization. Don't keep data for longer than you require it. So what is your retention policy? How long do you keep your employee data? Of course, there are statutory limitations for organizations that are governed. So things like banks, insurance companies, financial institutions essentially have certain time limits within which they must ensure that the data is available. Even for companies, I think for financial records, we need to keep for 6 years or so. But essentially, you must have a retention policy that says this is how long I will keep data. Sam, you can hint me when if I'm getting out of time, so I can move on. The key issues for companies, like we've said, when it comes to data, and when we come to discussions again pertaining to working from home, you will see how all these things tie in. So we've talked about things like consent. You must always obtain consent. So if, for example, your employees are working from home and you're recording them, you have to let them know you're recording them and they must consent. If you're going to project their pictures, you have to let them know that their images may be projected and they should consent. Now we have things like sensitive personal data. So there are different categories of data. There's just personal data, and then there's sensitive personal data. Your medical results. We've seen in recent times some people have printed people's am I back?
Yeah, you are back, Mike.
Hello.
Hello,
All
Mike.
right. It's sensitive personal data, and it's protection, data protection. DPIA. That essentially relates to if you are going to do any project, you have to look at what the project entails, what the impact will be on privacy and all of that. So that's also another requirement. And then we have things like data subject rights. What are the rights that data subjects have? Essentially, things like also transfer of data to third parties. If you are a data controller, you have collected data and you transfer it to a third party, whether you transfer it to a broker, a vendor, maybe someone who does background checks on your employees and all of that, you need to have a data processing agreement with that person, because the obligations that are on you will extend to that third party. And if anything goes wrong, if there is a breach from that third party, then of course you'll be vicariously liable for it. So you must ensure that whoever you're passing personal data to, also agrees that he will handle the data in a particular way. There are issues like transfer of data abroad. If you transfer data abroad, how do you do that? The NDPR is very detailed. There's a very detailed process for that. You must either get consent of the data subject and then certain other, again, with certain other requirements, or you go to NITDA, you go to the AGF, the Attorney General of the Federation, through NITDA to get consent to transfer data abroad. There are countries that we can transfer data to merely with consent. So those are countries that are on the white list of NITDA. White list simply means a list of countries that have comparable standards for data protection. They have comparable laws and regimes. For other countries that don't have such laws and regimes, you then need to go get AGF's consent, or you need to get the consent of the data subject, and then also ensure that it's in line with all the requirements in the NDPR. What is your relationship with your agents? How do you deal with agents who you pass data on or who collect data on your behalf? Very important, because if someone collects data on your behalf, you are the principal for that purpose. It then means that whatever happens or however that data is dealt with, and even the process, the collection process, if it is wrong, you will be liable for it. So if I send someone out, maybe I'm an insurance company, I send a broker out to go get data of possible, policy holders, I'm responsible for how that data is handled. And that's why the advice is always to ensure that you sign contracts with your agents that bind them to ensure that they also comply with the requirements under the NDPR. Then there's the issue of accuracy of personal data. We mentioned that earlier. Any personal data you collect, you must ensure it's accurate. Now, very quickly, any compliance requirement that doesn't have a sanction for non-compliance, you know that the likelihood that people will comply is very low. So, of course, the NDPR, like every other law, has sanctions for non-compliance, and the sanctions are quite steep. So, there's first and foremost, of course, the effect of what happens if personal data is, if there's a data breach or a privacy breach. First and foremost, it means that you may suffer reputational risk. People will say, be careful, don't give your information to this company, don't open an account with this bank, they can easily hack into your account. Don't use this telecoms company because people can easily hack into your mobile phones and all of that. Then there's even the more serious one, which is the fines. So under the NDPR, if you do not comply with the NDPR, there are statutory fines of up to 2% of your gross annual revenue. And, that is significant because it simply means that, you carry out your business activities for 1 year, and then you make one mistake, quote and unquote, there's a data breach from your company. And then what happens? You pay 2% of your annual gross revenue. So that's a significant amount. And of course, it may lead to things like loss of business opportunities. You can't access clients. You go and pitch for jobs, and clients say, no, I'm not going to give this guy my data because, he or she will not handle it well. And we've seen that there have been significant fines. So Yahoo has paid a fine of 1 billion. Yahoo has paid fines, Verizon has paid fines, and so there have been significant fines globally. Marriott, Facebook, Google, and all of that at one time or the other. So what do you do from here? It's very simple. You appoint a DPCU, that's a Data Protection Compliance Organization. You carry out a mandatory self-audit. You implement the audit findings, and then you file your audit reports by 15th of March, which has been extended to 15th of May by NITDA. So these are the basic requirements. These are the things you need to know about the NDPR. Of course, it's much more in-depth than this. But again, I think at this stage, this is where I will leave it. Do we take the questions now, or we'll take them later?
No, we'll take the question. We'll go into the questions right.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yes.
So back to you, Sam.
Okay. Okay. I welcome everybody back. So we'll be going straight away to our question and answers segment, and I'll be asking our facilitators a couple of questions, right? So at this point we begin to delve into the details of the webinar, and in a way that it ties to working from home. So I would want to start with Femi. Femi, generally, right, since the 9/11 attack in the US, the world changed dramatically. After 9/11, governments around the world, had cause to, begin more intrusive surveillance on citizens generally, and all of that, caused a pushback in terms of privacy rights. But we've seen a resurgence, a decade after, and we also, witnessed the emergence of the GDPR, which raised privacy to the higher level, right? And organizations around the world, from EU countries to other continents, countries, regulators, began to push more for privacy rights to be recognized, and for protection to also be, to be put in place, more or less. But now with the COVID-19 pandemic, most commentators have argued that we're likely to see a pushback in terms of privacy rights, because public health needs might take precedence over privacy rights. So can we get your thoughts on that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Femi.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sam and Michael. That was a very detailed presentation. For a thing or two. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being on this webinar. Sam, your question is a very trite one. Historically, if we look at it from the time issues of privacy rights had begun to have statutory flavor. I mean, of course, there was a major academic paper that was written in 1892 by Brandeis and Warren, which more or less laid the theoretical foundations to privacy, the right to privacy. But from the 1960s and 70s, when European states and nations started issuing regulations about data privacy, one thing that we've seen is that it's like a wave. Privacy goes up at a certain time, and then it becomes, comes down, and it goes up and it comes down. And if we were to use an artificial intelligence tool, one thing I will see is that every major global event that has a kind of groundbreaking, effect, particularly on security, on public health and emergency, privacy becomes one of the first things that becomes the whipping boy. So it is not new. And we'll continue to have situations like this, but of course, there will still be resurgence. Now, coming back to your question, definitely from the Nigerian perspective, Section 37 of our Constitution gives us the right to privacy, and it's clear. But if you also go back down to the Section 45, it limits that right. It limits the right to privacy on the basis of national defense, public safety, order, morality, and public health. Now, these limitations are wide. They are very, very like giving with a finger and taking back with 4 fingers. That is actually the way we look at it, because but the issue is that government is always interested, always likes the role of being a big brother, to know what you are doing, to see what you are doing. And the reason why we have laws is to limit the intrusiveness of government. So as it were, in the recent past, and this is no longer a conjecture, China, for example, they are using unmanned aerial vehicles to scan crowds, watch temperature, and track COVID suspects. And China has become a kind of a police state because of the COVID-19. South Korea, which is a little much more, still follows some democratic principles. South Korea's relative success in tackling the COVID-19 came as a result of the use of self-quarantine safety protection app for the 30,000 people who, South Korea did not do a national lockdown, but they are locking down those who have come in contact with those with COVID-19. But they are giving them an app that will be able to track them whenever they go out or go to certain places and all that. US also is not lagging behind in that. There are some discussions with Clearview, with Google, with Facebook, and all that, to be able to track people, and even your discussions online. If you mention some kinds of symptoms, just like we had in the Patriot Act of after the 9/11, you discover that now by you mentioning, oh, I have the kind of symptom, I feel like this, I feel like that, they begin to track you, and you can become, you can have the CDC coming to knock on your door the next day. And coming to Nigeria, yes, recently the Nigerian Governors Forum invited one of the telcos to make a presentation. They want to begin to use telco data to track, individuals, and they have their own reason. But also the right to privacy is there. So to answer your question, definitely there is always a struggle between privacy and public safety, order, and security. This will continue to be on, but let's see how it pans out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Femi. Mike, would want to get your perspective, with respect to where the scale should be tilting towards. Femi has made a case and has given us examples, of things happening around the world to help public health authorities to track COVID patients, and that seems to be tilting. And Femi, I would want to believe, might be speaking, from a public sector regulatory angle, and of course, regulators will, be trying their best possible to see how they contain situations, but all of that might appear to be compromising the privacy rights of citizens. So what will your advice be, as to where we should place the bar in terms of balancing the rights of citizens, vis-a-vis the right to life and public health?
Okay, so let me say this, that Femi hasn't said anything out of the ordinary. The only thing is that I think Femi left it hanging. I would have wanted him to conclude, and say something very decisive. So this is what I would say. The law is the law. The Constitution gives government rights to derogate from your rights for certain reasons, public health, national security, etc. So if, for example, someone is a terrorist, and then government needs to find that person, of course, government will be able, the telcos will be obliged to give us his call data. But I think when it comes to the issue of COVID-19, I like to think that the bar is higher than it would ordinarily be. And this is why I say so. So let's use a very practical example that some of us are aware of. There was a lady who came from the UK, and she went to Benue State, and she fell ill. So when she fell ill, she went to a private hospital. She was being treated for cold, cough, etc. And I don't know, someone hinted the government or the doctor treating her. Long story short, the government came and evacuated her from the private hospital and took her to the isolation center, administered a test on her without coming back to her to say, madam, your test is positive. The next day, the governor held a press conference in the state and said, look, we have our own first COVID-19 case, Mrs. So and so. Let me not mention her name so she will not sue me. You know, and then it became an issue. And the lady said, look, I'm not positive. In any case, nobody has given me a result. Now, I watched her interview on YouTube. She said the state government then wanted to administer drugs to her, and she refused. Then they brought mobile policemen, took her into a bus and evacuated her to Abuja, brought her to Abuja, administered another test to her, also didn't give her the results, but told her she was positive. Now, here's what I will say. COVID-19 is a public health crisis. But I believe, and again, let us be honest, if we see what the NCDC has done, except where maybe state governors or prominent citizens have come out to say, I tested positive or I tested negative, what we've seen is that they haven't usually released the names of people. They just tell us, oh, there are 100 new cases, and then if someone dies, they say a middle-aged man. Although the death of the first person who died, his name came out. I don't know if it was his family or if it was NCDC who gave us the name, but typically what we see is they say a middle-aged man or woman died. Now, that is one side of it. The other side is what happens if we travel on a flight, 200 of us, including Femi, who I know likes to travel out of the country. Then we come back. Now, one of us in the flight is now positive or found to be positive. Then we go to the airline and say, look, we need to find these people. Can you give us their contact details? Or we go to immigration and say, look, those guys who came in on Saturday, 20th of June, can we have their contact details? So I think to that extent, of course, government is entitled and has the right under the laws. So for things like contract tracing, no doubt, nobody will say, look, you breached my right of privacy. Why did BA give you? We're trying to trace you for your own good. We want to know if you've had contact with this person. But I think that public health reason should not extend to actually sharing people's test results. Or Anderson Tax, hey, Sam tested positive. Please, HR, put a notice on the board. Sam must not come to the office for the next 2 weeks. No. A manager tested positive yesterday. The manager has been advised not to come to work for the next 2 weeks. I think that is it. So for me, what I'll say is that for results, the bar is very high. For things like contact tracing, we can say yes, you know, the government we shouldn't put too much burden on government in terms of if they want to find people who have, you know, had contact with confirmed cases and all of that.
Thank you very much, Mike. So Femi, you had mentioned, Femi mentioned the COVID-19 tracking application. You mentioned that before now. So Femi, I know that there are countries around the world, you know, that had issued guidelines and regulations as to how developers, you know, what developers should be looking at, you know, when they are writing the programs for these applications, and you know what they should also be looking at when doing data protection impact assessment, right? So I don't know if since governors, you mentioned the governors forum are beginning to look at that direction. So I don't know, is NIDA planning to issue a guideline or a position or an advisory on what developers should be looking at, and even those controllers that will rely on these data subjects as well?
Thank you very much, Sam. NIDA has been very much busy in this season. I think probably after NCDC and the Presidential Task Force, I think NIDA is the next set of people who've been called out a couple of times. Now, there are a couple of things that have been done, particularly relating to privacy. Number one, we issued, we stated, gave the position about the issue of NCDC's operations, particularly the way they are trying to professionally go about the management and the dissemination of private information, that it is not in contravention of the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation. And what that has done is to actually to reduce the tension between the suspect and the public generally. Hello, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
So the other thing we've done is that we have developed a framework for the implementation of Nigerian data privacy regulation for the public sector. What we are saying is that because of the COVID-19, so many issues, so many people are, government organizations, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs wants data to be able to administer palliatives for the urban poor. The NCDC needs to get people's telco data to send them information, and I have been receiving a couple of text messages from NCDC, and I think some of us and many other government agencies are collecting and using data at this time. So what we have done based on the directive of the minister, the Honorable Minister for Communication and Digital Economy, is to give a holistic framework that guides the public sector on how to collect, use, store, and manage personal data. That is already done, and it's going through review process. When it's out, I will be able to bring that out. Well, there are some things, of course, as Michael knows, being a public, an ex-public officer himself, there are some things that I cannot be too specific. So I know he's trying to call me out on some things, but I'll try and maintain my temperament and just speak to the questions as much as I can. Thank you very much. Yeah.
That's noted, Femi. Thank you very much. So we, on this side of the hour, will be looking out for some guidance for COVID-19 tracking applications, perhaps from the regulator. And maybe if NIDA would want DPCOs to work with them in developing such a policy, we are very much available to give some support in developing that document. Okay, so my next question will be going to Lanre. So Lanre, would need your thoughts, right? With working from home becoming mainstream, and even when the lockdowns, are lifted, right, or even perhaps lax the beat, people are still likely to work from home. But one risk we find is that people both consciously and inadvertently share their personal information with third parties, with strangers, and all of that, on conferencing applications and on other platforms. Do you think that working from home raises the risk of identity theft, for people working from home?
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, definitely yes. Working from home raises a lot of security concerns, and one of them is the fact that with the fact available to people that people will be working from home remotely, and the main means of communication will be emails and some video conferencing tools to engage with clients or their colleagues in the office. So that has made those tools like targets for malicious attackers. So to perpetrate some like identity theft and credential theft from users, from remote workers. So definitely working from home has its challenges, and one of them is phishing. So there could be proliferation of phishing emails. That emails will be infected with virus, with attachments and some links. So when you get emails from unsolicited users, so you'll be very careful to open such email, because it is believed that during this period there will be high surge in the phishing emails. So some other things that could be of risk is the fact that users might have challenges in connecting to their colleagues, to their office to work. So hence they might use public Wi-Fi, public internet, which is less secure. So that could be a challenge also, because users in that case, they are susceptible to man-in-the-middle attack. So all of that, they are part of the risk that users working from home could be exposed to. So IT professionals or organizations should put measures in place to make sure that those risks are mitigated.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Landry. My next question will go to Femi. Femi, I hope you are still on the call.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Okay. So with respect to this new trend of working from home, what are the critical requirements in the NDPR that organizations should be looking at in order not to run foul of the regulation?
Yes, thank you very much. The NDPR, like Michael had, brilliantly summarized, has a plethora of obligations listed that organizations must, comply with. Now, but because, of course, we can't go through everything. One of the things that I would just the issue, the main one thing we should understand is that despite the public emergency, we've not gotten to a point where we suspend privacy rights. And see, if there is no suspension of privacy right by a law, maybe for example, act of the government, if there is no such seizure of suspension of rights, that means that the NDPR is still very much in operation. Now, it is expected that data controllers, processors, and other organizations, number one, they consider two key issues which the NDPR try to deal with. Number one is security, and number two is privacy. The security as relating to the organizational data and how the organization, where it stores its data, how it transfers the data, and where some of the applications being used. Organizations have a responsibility to look at the terms and conditions, the privacy policies of the various service providers, and look at it, which one can we use safely to be able to do what we need to do. So without going into particularities of the NDPR, the whole sessions of the NDPR still applies. If there is a major data breach at this point in time, it will still be investigated. It will still be dealt with as a breach until the investigation shows that it probably wasn't from the data controller, or there were other extraneous circumstances. It will be regarded that you have actually breached the regulation, and the law would take its course. So basically, the right to the legal basis for processing must still hold. For example, as an employer, you cannot just begin to use these platforms. One of the things you need to do is to send a mail or a communication seeking the consent of the employees, saying that, okay, now that you are working out of station, we want to use this application, and this application, these are the kind of data that I will be collecting through this application. We'll be taking your pictures, your video, probably recordings of these sessions will be done, and all that. The employer or the controller also has a responsibility to state the kinds of data that must not be shared through that platform. So more or less, because of this new situation we are, because privacy policy is a living document, it becomes improved as the situation changes. So what we need to do now is to develop a clause or a set of clauses to deal with this particular issue. So I've mentioned the things that need to be, some of the things that need to be there. Some of the other things that you need to state is that you cannot send this kind of information through this platform. For example, you are using, let me use Zoom. You cannot share this kind of sensitive documents through. You need to state the documents that need not to be shared and the things that need to be shared, so that whenever issues arise, it will be very clear what you've told your employees and what you've told them not to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Femi. And so, if I hear you correctly, organizations, one of the key things they should be doing now should be to update their privacy policies, to accommodate working from home and the kind of information that is shared and that moves across, from end to end. Okay, thank you very much. What about, will there be a need for a DPIA, regarding working from home?
Yes,
data protection impact assessment.
Impact assessment. Yes, data protection impact assessment could. I mean, it's necessary at this time. But one thing we've also seen is that we don't need to build from ground zero. There are information available, that organizations can quickly look at, analysis of some of the platforms, security, privacy policies, and all that can now use. So you do not necessarily have to go into an elaborate process of data privacy impact assessment. You can use the information available to make your own decision as to how it applies to your business. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Femi. So I'll be asking Lanre the next question. Lanre, one trend that we've seen across organizations is that with the WHF becoming mainstream for now, some organizations, those that have capacity, provide equipment, devices for their employees to use during this period, from laptops, to internet dongles, and also to telephones, mobile phones, printers, and all of that. But for some other organizations, they allow employees to bring their own, to use their own devices at this time. For some organizations, the employees may have been using desktop computers. It's unable to move all of that. They're unable to move all of that out of the office at this time, but they will now have to rely on private computers. So can you run us through the risk level of each of these approaches? The first being using company devices, the second one using employee devices.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Risk involved in using company devices, they include users updating their software. So they get updates appropriately to make sure that their systems are patched well. They are not vulnerable. They are not exposed because they are no more in the office. They are working remotely. Also, the firewalls. So because they will not be connecting to, they will be connecting to the public directly. They might not have a connection to their internal office. So that exposes them to threats available on the internet. So their firewall, the system firewalls, are to be protected. So another thing that could be of great risk to system users working remotely with company devices is the internet facilities. So they will be connecting directly to the public network. So they need something like VPN to make such connections secure. VPN we encapsulate whatever transaction they are doing from the public. So then using devices that are vulnerable, like remote, using removable media. So when users are working, maybe they have company approved removable media that they needed to use. So such media should be protected. Like they should have a form of protection in such a way that even if those devices are misplaced, they can still be the data inside them are still protected. So while such media could have password protection, they can be encrypted and all of that. Then another thing is theft. So theft could be another risk to the company data, because you have company data sitting on your laptop, and because many people are home now, some they don't have anything to do, they've resorted to like criminal activities that we help them to get something, so which expose users to such risk. So if the company's devices should be protected in such a way that even if the devices are stolen, they are still protected. The data inside them are safe from malicious user or unauthorized access. So that can be done using encryption. So encryption to protect the system from being accessed. Another thing for the users, users using BYOD, as in they are using their own personal system for official purposes. So which means company data can easily be downloaded to devices that are not managed by such organizations. So organizations using BYOD should put in place measures to make sure that they are implementing MDM solutions like mobile device management. So such solution will enable the company to remotely wipe whatever data they have on such devices, even when it is stolen. So also, users will need to be updated on what they need to know, what they need to run away from. To make sure that the company data is well protected. Another thing they can do is putting.
Thank you, Henry.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Larry. Let me move to the next question, which will be going to Mike. Mike, we've one word that has become quite popular this period is video bombing. Some have also, particularized it to Zoom bombing and co. So we've experienced situations where in the course of a video conferencing call, you just have third parties joining the call that were never supposed to be a part of it, right? So we'd want you to speak to that, perhaps the privacy issues around that, and what organizations should be looking at. And Femi may want to also add after your contribution.
All right. Thank you for actually bringing that up. Interestingly, in the course of this webinar, I would have been guilty of video bomb, because as I was here, my son came and wanted to, get into this room, and I had to lock the door and stop him from getting in. So yes, video bombing is a reality, and it's something that comes with, particularly with working from home. And this is because people who work from home are working, in a very informal environment. So essentially what you see is that, of course, in the office, you are more structured, you're all dressed up in your suits, and everybody's at his desk. So even when you have a conference call or a video call at work, typically what will happen is that you will go into the conference room, or you go to a designated, area for that purpose. So it is one of the, I think in terms of challenges, I would say that it ranks low, but it does have, implications for data privacy. And the first thing, of course, is that if I'm having, for example, a conversation or a conference call with someone, why should another person come into the picture? But more than that, also, it raises then questions. So what if I'm having a meeting with a client and we're reviewing client confidential information, payroll information, and all of that? Does that mean that ordinarily my wife has access to it? Did you understand what I'm saying? Or my friend who's in my house, or my younger brother? So someone can walk past my screen even during a live video call, then what else is happening? So you begin to sow doubts in the minds of the people that you are dealing with. So there are a range of things we can do. I think the first thing is that whenever you're going to have these video calls and all of that, you must try and have it in a designated area or an area that allows you to have some privacy, even in your house. Okay, the second thing again is that, if you're having anything on your screen and all of that, you should close those things, close every other application and all of that. So you just have the video conferencing app and all of that, so that even if, for example, you mistakenly share your screen with someone, there's nothing to be seen there. But more importantly, is just to always have that consciousness, okay? That you are working from home doesn't mean it's informal, it's still formal, it's work related, and you treat it with all the seriousness that you need to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Landry, I will just ask, still on video conferencing, now from an IT perspective, what will you advise organizations to be looking at, regarding preventing video bombing, digitally? Mike has spoken from, the non-digital angle, so I would want you to just in 1 minute speak from the digital angle.
Oh, okay. The organization will need to educate their staff on the data privacy and security, so that they'll be aware of what they need to do. Then they should also make meetings as private as possible, so they can take some precautions to make sure that people that are invited into the call are the ones that get into it. So then meeting invites should be restricted by ensuring that user can sign in with password and some other codes that they might require. Then organization and users should not share or post meeting links on public platforms. So
okay, that's fine.
So those are
Larry. Those are some of the few things. Okay, because we have less than 30 minutes to round up, and I still have a couple of questions. So I'll throw the next one at Femi. Femi, this period, and this is like a hypothetical scenario. If an employee, tests positive for COVID-19, in your view, in your opinion, do you think that employee owes his employer the duty of disclosing his or her condition, and let's even assume that the person has already been treated and is now negative? What should such an employee be doing?
Okay, thank you, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you.
So it's a very live question, because every other day our colleagues are being infected with COVID-19. So when an employee contracts COVID-19, for example, because we initially I mentioned the issue of section 45 that talks about public health, safety, and security, and all that. It is, even if there is no particular provision in the contract of employment, it is expedient and it is common law and logic that whenever you have any situation that would probably impact on another person, you have a responsibility to mention it to the gatekeeper. In this situation, the employer. For example, an employer, I want you to come to the office to do this or do that. It is expedient that the employer knows that there is an overriding public health issue that you are dealing with, that you would not be able to do that, not because of yourself, but eventually it's also going to affect other employees and it's going to ground the business. So from my from my considered view, any employee who contracts COVID-19 or any such contagious disease has a responsibility, a duty, as a matter of fact, to mention to the employer. And if you go back, when you are getting letter of employment, one of the things that employers usually require is for you to go and do a test, a medical test. The reason is because they want to know whether you have a particular underlying condition that would negatively impact on your work. So I think it's, to answer the question, yes, employees have a duty, but the employer has a duty under the NDPR to ensure that that information is not disclosed except to lawful persons, for example, the NCDC and public authorities who may need that information. Aside from that, the employer is supposed to manage that information, because you cannot also be discriminated against because you are a COVID-19 kind of patient. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Femi. Femi, I'll still, I have a follow-up question to that. Can a media house publish, legitimately, under the basis of freedom of the press, publish a COVID-19 test result?
Well, that we had a very, very pathetic case the other day. I don't want to mention a media house because this is a public discussion. They released the test result of COVID-19 patient, published it in the based on the knowledge and the expectation of that media house. We expect that such organizations be much more circumspect. For you to release the test result of an individual, number one, it's not just a personal data, it's a sensitive personal data. And the question is, what value do you derive from such? Now, the law is clear about some of these issues. There was a recent case, I cannot particularly remember the name of the case, but the decision was that what happened there was a guy went, he had an accident, he killed somebody in an accident, and the newspaper reported it. He went to the prison, he served his term, and he came out. By the time he came out, that information is still, when you still go to Google, you put his name, the information about the accident that happened years ago still comes up. That was now prejudicing people from relating, people saying you are a killer, something like that. It affected him, and the court said yes. So the right to be forgotten. Yes, so the court actually said, look, there is a right to be forgotten. Now, there was another case involving BBC versus BBC. BBC was, trying to do doing aerial view of a suspect's compound, and the court said, look, BBC, you are overreaching your responsibility as a media house. You've gone beyond your call as a media house. So in the balance of all this, media houses have a responsibility, and what I would advise those who are breached in these kinds of is to actually test. Let's go to the court, test it, sue them for underthought, and let's begin to see media houses paying some amount of money for some of the irresponsible reporting that they are doing. To bring some
should we be expecting it? Should we be expecting it to take some regulatory steps? Towards curbing such uses?
Yes, so we need to be, while I would definitely, NIDA has a responsibility as an administrative agency, but I also feel that the judiciary also needs to start coming up much more aggressively into the data protection issues, because at the end of the day, the judiciary, when we have a balance and a conflict, the judiciary eventually makes the decision as to who is right and who is wrong. So while NIDA needs to continue, but NIDA cannot solve all the problems, there are judicial interpretative functions that cannot be taken away from the judiciary.
Okay.
Can I quickly play the devil's advocate? Let's stay on
that. Yes.
So,
my one, yes.
So, Femi, very quickly, I know a guy in my estate who has tested positive. However, I got to find out he has refused. He's a big man, so he refuses to go to the isolation center. He's moving around. He's attending estate meetings, shaking everybody's hand. Then I have a friend who works in Whistleblowers newspaper, Nigeria Limited.
Yeah.
Then I informed my friend who's an editor in Whistleblowers newspaper. And I said, look, this guy is endangering public health. He's still moving around with his mobile policeman. He's still blowing siren. Yesterday, he even threw one small O1 bear in his house. So do you think that Whistleblowers...
And you were there? Sam,
I was there.
Mike, hope you didn't go for the O1 bear.
I'm just giving an example. So do you think that Whistleblowers newspaper Nigeria, given their duty as members of the first estate of the Rim, who are supposed to, uphold public safety and all of that, do you think they are justified in that circumstance to now say Alhaji Big Stomach tested positive for COVID-19 and he's still living in his house in Banana Island?
I believe that in that scenario, though of course you are supposed to also be in jail by now because you even attended the OMB, but let's leave that. We'll come back to you now. In that circumstance, because there is an overriding public interest, which the Whistleblowers Nigeria Limited is serving by reporting, that is a different scenario. But another issue would be when Mrs. A went to a lab, a testing center, NCDC approved testing center, and she got there was a test conducted on her, and that test verbatim was reproduced. Even for Chief Owambe, it would have been nice, fine for the newspaper. Big Stomach, tested positive. That is okay, but for you to bring out the details of the results is overreaching on the issues of privacy, because even though there are public interest issues to be addressed, but public interest stops when the government has been, the public has been duly informed, but not for private information that is not necessary for them to do their job, and for the public to know. Yeah.
So just quickly, it is okay to mention that Mr. X, we suspect or we've been reliably informed that Mr. X tested positive, and keep it there, or not to now publish Mr. X's test results.
Yes, I believe it is, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have just 15 minutes more to go. And my next question goes to Mike, and it has to do still with COVID-19 results. Mike, we know we have the Freedom of Information Act that permits citizens, to demand for the release of information from government. Can citizens rely on the FOI, to demand that government hospitals, labs, or even the NCDC release maybe complete data on infection, on COVID-19 results, or perhaps anonymized or pseudonymized data? Do you think private citizens can be looking at that option in exercising their rights?
Well, before answering your question, I think we can see that there has been some transparency. At least we have details of persons who have tested positive in terms of numbers, those who have been discharged, those who are still being treated, and then deaths. I think to the extent that you want to know what is happening, so NCDC, how many people have you tested since February 28th or 27th, when we had our index case? How many persons have tested positive? I think to that extent, it may be covered by FOI. But I think that is where it stops, because you know that even under the FOI, one of the limitations for request of information under the FOI is personal information. I cannot write to government to say, give me Buhari's salary pay slips, or give me Buhari's account details so that I can go and check it in the bank. So I think what private individuals, civil society groups and all of that can do, if at all they want to, is to say, NCDC, Ministry of Health, Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, can you tell us how many persons you have tested? Can you tell us how many persons tested positive? Can you tell us how many persons have been discharged? To that extent, I'll say yes, but anything other than that, I'm not sure that they want to get names or tell us the addresses of these people, where do they live, which state. I think they tell states anyway, but I think also that there's certain limitations to how much information you can get, specific information.
Sorry, Mike,
okay,
can I also, can Can I come in? Can I
yes,
weigh in on
yes.
that? Yes, thank you so much. Mike actually was referring to Section 14(1) of the Freedom of Information Act, which limits, provides exception to freedom of information requests relating to personal information maintained on clients, on patients, on residents and students, and all that. But there's also Section 2, and actually I'm with Mike fully on that. But there are also scenarios where freedom of information request may still be valid in this circumstance. Okay, let's use a kind of an example. If Alaji A, he died, Alaja B followed, and Chief Eze followed, and all of them they went for a particular meeting, a kind of Owambe or a kind of party meeting. Eventually, because the governor of K State does not want people to think that COVID-19 is increasing in the state, he goes to say, okay, NCDC just mentioned that they died of underlying condition, diabetes and all that. Now, the issue where the public interest is going to come in would now be that Alaji A, because of his religion, he was buried in this particular place, and he was buried in this particular way. And Chief Eze, because of his own culture, religion, and all that, had to be taken to the mortuary and kept there for 6 months. Eventually, and people were coming in contact one way or the other with the carcasses of these people. It is going to be detrimental to other people's health. So in that circumstance, I'm just thinking, I'm not speaking authoritatively for government, but I'm thinking in that circumstance, freedom of information can actually be invoked to say that, look, because we reasonably suspect, based on the circumstances surrounding these deaths, that these people died of COVID-19. So, and by their death, if it's not properly managed, it's going to affect my brother who works in the mortuary or who works in this kind of place. In that situation, NCDC may be forced to actually disclose certain information that they have, relating to them. But it's just a thought, my thought, but I think it can be tested in court by more serious lawyers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Femi. I'll come to Lanre now. Lanre, I'll combine two questions in one because of our time. We've all heard so much about the security challenges of Zoom, and we have a question from a participant here, that, and I'll read it verbatim. It states that, is the upgrade 4.0 version of Zoom secure for private meetings? And the second question is, what is the relevance of ISO 27001 in all of these security breaches and all of that? Okay, Larry, the floor is for you.
Okay, with the upgrade that Zoom have done, I think they have put in place some measures to make sure that the platform is much more secure than it is before. So in such a way that you can put in place, you can lock your meeting, you can as well use a password for users who want to log into those meetings. So it is safer now than it was before. But there are still privacy concerns, because I am aware of a case that a case of eavesdropping that the LinkedIn, Facebook were accused of. So which they said they somehow they can listen, they can eavesdrop into whatever conversation the participants in the meetings are discussing. So that is in the courts. So I'm not sure if the case has been decided yet, but so I see some privacy concern about it. But for the security, as in whether video bombing and all some other security issues that were identified, whether they have been sorted out. I think the new the newer version of this application addressed it. Then
Okay,
for
so,
ISO
27,000.
27001, okay, so the relevancy of it
okay, Lanre.
is an ISO in place ISO 27001 will be largely securing their information system and then mitigating a lot of security breaches.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. I'll give 1 minute to everybody to round up. So so to just give us your closing thoughts, basically about what organizations should be doing to keep their employees and the organization safe, even while working from home. So I'll just give each person 1 minute. Larry, I'll start with you.
Okay, so now that working from home is now the new normal, so I would say the organizations should make sure that as much as possible, they secure the devices that their users, remote workers, will be using. So they should make sure they are adequately patched. All those measures they need to put in place, they should educate them the more to make sure that that they are aware of all the threats that they might be exposed to. So those are the things that I think they should do. They should put in place a more secure measures to make sure that their data and information are protected.
Okay, Femi, you go next. Can we hear your thoughts? On what organizations should do? Okay.
I think this is the time for organizations to take information security very seriously. Before now, 2-3 years ago, the fad was ISO 27001, and now every business, every thriving business is a data business. So now organizations more than ever must now begin to implement ISO 27001. I'm not an agent for them, but or if there are equivalent information security management systems that they can adopt. And also, this is even much more pertinent now that organizations implement the NDPR and they get very good and competent, DPCOs to help them through the process. The reason why I'm saying this is that the possibilities of data leakage is more now. But one of the first things regulator or subjects will look at is what have you done to preempt and to avoid these kind of scenarios. Even when it happens, you would have been able to say, well, I have done this, I've done this, I've done this, and of course, it weighs in on regulatory minds when decisions are being made. So it's time for compliance, and we need to really do it quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femi. Mike, let's get your closing thoughts.
My closing thoughts are very simple. Organizations should engage under syntax to carry out self-audit for them so that we can identify what the risks are and advise them on how to mitigate the risk. I'm not, but jokes apart, yes, this is the time for organizations to up their game. We've seen that the world is changing. I don't think the world is ever going to go back to where it was prior to COVID-19. The concept of the physical office is going to be challenged. People have worked from home successfully. We have done it. We've seen that it works. As long as people deal with personal data outside office space, there needs to be regulation. There needs to be concerted efforts, especially by organizations. They need to invest in that area. Very quickly, let me use 10 seconds. Femi, please, a quick question for you. I just realized that Facebook has a tracker of my offline activities. And I was wondering, did I consent to that? And are you aware of that? So I've seen that if you go to Facebook, there's a feature where you can see that Facebook has a tracker of your offline activities. I know you can disable it, but why was it enabled in the first place? And what is NIDA doing about that?
Well, Mike, if there are so many things that are happening at the same time, if I tell you that NIDA has covered the field, I'll definitely be speaking political speak. But one thing I can tell you is that we'll look at it. We've called out data companies before, and they have started the journey of compliance. Nigeria is a big market, and we are not compromising what we think we are. So we'll look into it, and if there are situations that we have found that people are not giving consent or stuff like that, we'll try and see what we can do to get the right thing for our people. Yeah.
Okay. So Mike, I guess you are done.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, for all of their brilliant, in-depth submissions. It's been amazing. I've learned a whole lot. And I also thank all of our attendees. Thank you for participating in this webinar. It's the first in a series. We'll be coming up with other webinars, and we'll be sharing the invites from later this week, so you can participate from next week on several, topical issues that has to do with the COVID-19 situation. But in all, we encourage organizations to begin to invest in information security, in privacy, in data protection, because like Mike said, and like all our panelists said, this is the new normal, and this is the world we live in. Like September 11 changed the world, COVID-19 will also change the world. Like the Spanish flu changed the world a century ago, COVID-19 will change our world, from today going forward. So we encourage businesses to begin to think forward and look forward and position themselves, for the future. Thank you once more for attending, and please stay safe. Bye for now.